There it goes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friday, June 20th, 2025 episode of On Iowa Politics. This week on the podcast, a familiar Democrat enters the Iowa 1 race, while a familiar Democrat exits the Iowa 4 race. And we covered the Iowa connections to last weekend's shooting in Minnesota. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. With me this week are Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief Tom Barton. Hello, Tom.
Heidi ho.
Lead Des Moines Bureau Chief Maya Marchel Hoff is here. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Erin.
We have Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times. Greetings, Sarah.
Hello, Erin.
And Jared McNett of the Sioux City Journal. Hello, Jared.
A happy summer solstice to you, Erin.
And also with us is Gazette columnist Althea Cole. Hello, Althea.
Hi, Erin.
All right, we're going to start this week on the campaign trail, where this past week we had candidates both getting in and getting out of 2026 campaigns. Let's start in eastern Iowa, where Democrat Christina Bohannon announced her third congressional campaign. Bohannon seeks the opportunity to once again challenge Republican incumbent McNett Miller Meeks. Ironically here, Bohannon is trying to essentially pull a Miller Meeks on Miller Meeks. You remember, McNett Miller Meeks was elected to Congress on her fourth attempt, and as I said, this is Bohannon's third try. Tom wrote our story on Bohannon's entry into the race, but I want to start today with Sarah. This is Iowa's first district, is in your territory. What should we know about the Miller Meeks Bohannon 3 match? And there's a patent pending on that term. I'm trying to pull a Pat Riley here.
Yeah, so Tom did a great job on that story. There's definitely some history here, but I'm sure people are all pretty familiar with the stories of Christina Bohannon and Miller Meeks. But I think kind of the most important thing to note is that Bohannon really thinks she's got another chance, that she can win in a year where political headwinds typically favor the party out of power, and President Donald Trump's approval ratings have gone down, and there's been, close elections before with McNett Miller Meeks in this swing district. So the history, Bohannon lost to Miller Meeks in 2022 by about 7 percentage points. And then she came back in 2024 and lost by just less than a percentage point, 799 votes out of more than 427,000 cast. And so in that district, more people in every county voted for Bohannon than they did for Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. So she really outperformed the top of the ticket, and vice versa. Miller Meeks really underperformed Trump at the top of the ticket. And so I think that all spells news for Bohannon, that she thinks she can come in and maybe pull off an upset in this district. And of course, this is all hypothetical until Miller Meeks confirms she's running. And I mean, I think everybody pretty much presumes she will, but I don't think she's said it officially. And then they both win their primaries. Bohannon is running against 2 other Democrats, Travis Terrell of Johnson County and Bob Kraus. And then Miller Meeks is facing a challenge from within her own party in Davenport Republican David Pouch. Miller Meeks won that primary with about 55% of the vote to Pouch's 44%, which was he did better than was expected, considering he only raised about $43,000 for that race. So I think we'll see issues come up, such as the big, beautiful bill in the race, especially as that continues to move through this summer. But, it's possible that there's going to be some new issues that come up in next year. And, maybe we forget about the big, beautiful bill. But certainly right now, Democrats are certainly not letting voters forget about spending reductions on Medicaid and SNAP benefits in particular.
Althea, Sarah noted a couple of recent examples. This district is competitive every cycle because of its political makeup. It's just always a toss-up, and Miller Meeks, once again, is one of the country's most targeted incumbents. What does round 3 look like? Again, to Sarah's point, assuming that this is the matchup we wind up with, nothing guaranteed yet, but if this is the another Bohannon Miller Meeks campaign, does it look any different to you this time around?
I mean, third time could be the charm for Christina Bohannon. We'll have to see. I mean, what we're not in is a general election year with a presidential nominee on the ticket. Specifically, we're not in a year with Trump at the top of the ticket. So that could make a difference. That being said, I took a look at the voter registration totals in the district. And for quite a while there, the district, going back to, I don't remember what year, but it was actually pretty heavily Democrat. And it always had a strong incumbent in Dave Loebsack. Loebsack won quite a few years ago, upsetting incumbent Jim Leach, and he just kept winning the district until he was ready to retire. And, Miller Meeks took 3 shots at him, couldn't succeed on any of those times, and only succeeded on the 4th time when Loebsack was finally ready to retire. Since then, the district has trended quite a bit red. In terms of active voters, there's definitely an our advantage that there wasn't in the past. How that will affect Miller Meeks and Bohannon, it would definitely be easier for Miller Meeks against Bohannon or any other Democrat for that matter, given the continued advantage in the voter registration total. Another thing that helps is that the presumed, challenger, I don't expect anybody else to get in the race from the Republican Party. Miller Meeks has already faced that presumed challenger. I don't think that David Pouch will be quite as well received by particularly more right-leaning Republicans in the district as he was in 2024. I may be wrong, but we'll have to see. So there are a few differences from previous years, but I agree that we're going to see a lot of the same.
I was going to say, I guess ultimately the big question is, does this race look more like 2024 and 2020 or more like 2022? And that really hinges on that question, I think.
I mean, I would say right now it's looking a lot more like 2024 than 2022. I do not expect that Miller Meeks would run away with it unless I'm trying to think what circumstances would need to change in order for that to happen. I think that the national pressures would need to be so great that the Democratic National Committee would need to continue faltering, as it has been over the last several months. I also think that voters would need to be so enthusiastic on the Republican side that you don't always see in what I'll call an incumbent year. In 2022, when Miller Meeks, coasted with relative ease, I should say, compared to the other times that they've tried or that she's tried. That was a real strong year for Republicans, not as strong as it should have been. The red wave that was expected was more of a red trickle. But at the same time, in Iowa, Republicans ran away with everything, and that definitely helped Miller Meeks. So if we see more of that in 2026, that's when things would look better. But right now, it's looking a lot more like 2024 or 2020.
Yep. Gonna be an interesting to watch it again, and again noting that we got the primaries to get through first. I think it's safe to say that Christina Bohannon is the favorite in that primary, and obviously Marionette Miller Meeks is, but we will go through that exercise. Skipping across the state now from the Mississippi to the Missouri.
The better river.
Jared's planted his flag.
Only one of them is called the Mighty Mississippi. Okay, all right.
Here we go.
Only the other one is the Grandfather River, which I think is a much cooler sort of name, I would say.
I'm sorry. Wait, did you say the Grandfather River?
That is correct. Yes, that's one of the names.
I've never heard that one.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay. Which I would think would also be a strike against it. As cool as a nickname as it is, feels like it should be better well known.
Respect your elders, Erin. Respect your elders.
Fair enough. All right. Anyways, in Western Iowa's 4th Congressional District, Democratic candidate Ryan Melton has suspended his campaign. Melton was the 4D Democrat in 2022 and 24. Jared, you covered the announcement. What did Melton say? Why did he want to get out this time? And where do Western Iowa Democrats go from here?
So, yeah, in a lengthy thread on Twitter on Tuesday, Melton announced that he was suspending his campaign, which is just about a month after he launched his third bid. And he said it was one of the toughest decisions he's had to make, and that there were a number of factors, including an impending job loss, a health concern, and then his family missing him while he's been touring the district and campaigning, which is certainly understandable both ways, because 3 different cycles of campaigning is not easy work for anybody, especially when you're trying to unseat a pretty favored incumbent. And then, he said too that he thinks the Democratic Party is in a better place in the 4th district than it was before 2022. And he noted his performance did improve from 2022 to 2024, though, of course, the gap between him and Feenstra was still large. It did narrow just a little bit in those 2 cycles. He also referenced, which we talked about a bunch last year, Kevin Virgil, who primaried Feenstra in 2024, supporting him, or telling people to support him in the general election, and said that Iowa Republicans take the 4th district for granted, and that eventually that will come back to kind of haunt them. And then the other big point that he made sure to make in the thread is that more everyday people need to be running for office, just because they can much better relate to a majority of Americans. So he touched on quite a few things, and like I said, it was quite a lengthy thread. And now with him getting out of the race, which is still more than a year away, the Democrats don't have anyone currently declared for the 4th district.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously because of the makeup there, the bench isn't super deep, right, Jared? I mean, and of some of the names you might think of, they're either already running or thinking of running for the Senate in J.D. Scholten and Josh Turek. Are there any other names that just come to the front of your mind of Western Iowa Democrats that either might think about this now, or some Democrats over there will try to coax into a 4th district campaign?
Well, like you said, the people you might think are already elsewhere. I do wonder if not for some of the Senate kind of declarations or chatter, if maybe we had seen some of those people try in the 4th district. Maybe not, because it's even more of an uphill battle to try to win here than win statewide. I don't even know who would be the most viable person. Like, one person that jumps out, although he hasn't been in politics in the same way for a couple of years, is Chris Hall, who was a legislator here for a number of years, but again, he has kind of shifted his career somewhat, so I don't necessarily know that would be that likely. But other than even that, which is not very likely at all, I struggle for another pick.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. It's going to be interesting. And I guess real quick before we move on, Jared, how, as you've noted, this is the one near impossible mountain to climb in Iowa, save one outstanding exception in 2018. This election has never hardly ever been close, and you'd have to go a long way back before it was. How important is it even to have a Democratic candidate there? And I know there's always talk about you got to have at least one there, so you're helping control the margins for your statewide candidates. I mean, I guess that's why it's tough to get someone to run for that office, right?
It's not the best thing as a motivator to tell someone, hey, we need a person to run here to keep our margins down statewide. That's not usually why someone gets into any kind of election. But I mean, I do think if you're, a party person, Republican or Democrat, you should want people running in as many places as possible, as many viable people in as many places as possible. In part because then, it makes your opponent have to run in those same places and have to expend, resources as well. So if nothing else, that's not the biggest motivator for an individual person to run either, but that is an important strategic thing that you can listen to plenty of strategists talk about.
Before we move on to our last topic, Althea, and forgive me, I'm going to put you on the spot here. We didn't talk about this in the game planning, but we don't have theoretically a Republican candidate here for this district, because we're presuming that Randy Feenstra, the incumbent, is going to run for governor. He's calling what he's doing an exploratory run for governor, but it sure seems like he's going to follow through on that. I'm curious, Althea, based on what you've seen from Randy Feenstra, are you assuming he's going to go through with that? And if he is, I would think that would become a pretty attractive campaign for a Republican primary if it's suddenly an open seat race.
What I would say to that is Randy Feenstra is the only candidate of either the declared or the seriously considering who's actually been running commercials. I was watching TV the other night, and poof, there's a Randy Feenstra commercial. So in that regard, he's deaf. You don't do that unless you are seriously considering a run, and for that matter, you don't do that unless you are raising money in order to put on those commercials for a run. So that tells me he's about as serious of a contender as it gets. I have heard that as far as who would be a potential replacement for him, Lynn Evans from that district, the state legislator, is considering a run. I'm not aware of whether or not he's made it official. If he has, I apologize. I've not gotten that message yet. But
I'm trying to remember that myself. Tom, do you remember whether Lynn Evans is still into considering or official?
Yeah, he's launched an exploratory committee as of a month ago. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Althea. Continue.
Oh no, I mean that's essentially what I was going to say. Right now it looks like the person considering to replace Feenstra in that seat would be Lynn Evans, just by virtue of the fact that we haven't really heard any other names. And if there are any other names, we should probably follow up on that.
Well, there's something we might be following up on soon enough.
Ooh, that was perfectly teased. Well done, Jared. As I like to say, something to discuss for a future episode of On Iowa Politics. It sounds like. Yeah, I'm getting the nod in the affirmative. All right, let's finish this week on the unfortunate topic of the shooting last weekend in Minnesota, where a man shot two state lawmakers and their spouses. Minnesota State Rep. Melissa Hortman and her husband were killed. State Senator John Hoffman and his wife are recovering in the hospital. The alleged shooter, who has been arrested and charged with state and federal crimes, including murder, had a hit list of 45 elected officials, all of them Democrats. There are a couple of Iowa connections to this unfortunate story, and one of them, which our Tom Barton covered this week, was that Senator Hoffman had some Iowa ties. Tom, tell us about that.
Yeah, so Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman, who was wounded in the shooting along with his wife, worked in Polk County in the 90s and was one of a handful of Polk County Democrats who founded and put together the West Des Moines Democrats back in 1992. I talked to Iowa State Senator Claire Celsi, a Democrat from West Des Moines, who worked with Senator Hoffman at the time to put that group together way before there were any Democrats in office from the western suburbs there in the Des Moines metro. And according to the Minnesota Legislative Reference Library, Hoffman worked for Polk County and the state of Iowa from 1991 to 2001. Hoffman's wife, Yvette, was a former on-air personality at a Des Moines radio station, Star 102.5. Listeners of that station may remember her as Kelly Fox. And so I talked to Senator Celsi, who said that Senator Hoffman was what she said, a regular Joe in Polk County, way before he thought about running for office of any kind, and that he obviously got the bug for public service at some point during his time in Iowa, either when he was working for Polk County or when he later went on to work for the state. She said that we all knew that he was destined to run at some point. We just didn't know when. Said that she was thrilled when she heard that he had been elected to the Minnesota legislature, and called him up and called him just a really nice guy. I also talked to Democratic former Iowa State Senator Rob Hogue of Cedar Rapids, who served in law school, or was in law school at the same time as Melissa Hortman, the former Minnesota House Speaker. They were both first year law students at the same time at the University of Minnesota back in the fall of 1992, and said that they had every class together that first year. Said that Melissa Hortman was committed public servant who deeply loved her state, was devoted to making it a better place and bringing people together. He talked about how in 2023, when the Iowa Democratic Party was looking for a speaker at the last minute for their annual Wingding political fundraiser at the Surf Ballroom and Museum in Clear Lake, Hogue suggested Hortman. And so she ended up being the keynote speaker for that Iowa Democratic fundraiser back in 2023. And so he talked about that and being there and just how extraordinarily proud he was of his friend and classmate. Talked about again how this just was a unimaginable, horrific tragedy, and how he hoped that if any good came out of this, that one, it would force people to see the consequences of violence and how horrific it is, and that would spark some sort of kind of national movement to address gun violence, inflamed political rhetoric, and kind of the exacerbated political polarization that we're seeing in the country. And then secondly, that people would appreciate and emulate Hortman's ability to work with people from all different backgrounds and bring them together. He talked about how as Speaker of the Minnesota House, she worked to bring together progressive Democratic lawmakers from the Metro Twin Cities, as well as moderates from the increasingly conservative Iron Range.
And speaking of, Tom, that hit list that I mentioned, I wanted to get this from you real quick before I go to Jared. That, as I understand, that list from the shooter had Iowa names on it, but they did not, authorities did not release the name of the other people on that list. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, correct. So according to Minnesota law enforcement and state legislative leaders, there were individuals from Iowa apparently included in the writings that were recovered from that fake police vehicle that was used in the targeted shooting last weekend. The head of the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension told the Washington Post that in addition to Minnesota, officials on the list came from Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Nebraska, and Iowa. I talked to Iowa House and Senate Democratic leaders, Representative Brian Meyer and Senator Janice Weiner, and they said that they proactively reached out on Monday to the Iowa Department of Public Safety and the Iowa State Patrol, which provides security at the Iowa State Capitol, upon hearing news reports that Iowa officials, again, were mentioned in those writings. Both said that they were told by state law enforcement officials that they were, again, aware of people in Iowa included on the list, and that those people were contacted privately either by DPS, Iowa Department of Public Safety, or other law enforcement to make them aware. They said that officials, were not publicly releasing those names. Senator Weiner said that her understanding is that there were no Iowa lawmakers, no Iowa legislators on that list. I haven't gotten confirmation of this, but what I've heard is that potentially there may have been names of either Planned Parenthood locations in Iowa, or officials linked to Planned Parenthood in the state. Law enforcement officials, Minnesota authorities have said that, among the names, in addition to prominent state and federal lawmakers, were also community leaders and abortion rights activists.
All right. And Jared, the Sioux City Journal on this had some really fascinating reporting about the alleged shooter having owned a home in Northwest Iowa. until very recently. And there's just some fascinating stuff in that story. I encourage everybody to go find it, but tell us a little bit about what's in that reporting, Jared.
Yeah, so our intern Eric was in Pearson, Iowa on Tuesday. Pearson's in the northeastern part of Woodbury County, about 40 minutes from Sioux City. And he talked to neighbors and the current tenant of the property. The tenant is the contract holder, but the deed holder is still the alleged shooter. And the current contract holder has made it abundantly clear, both to us and to other outlets, that he's had little to no interaction with the alleged shooter since he acquired the property on contract last year in August for about $60,000. Now that it's kind of left this, horrific situation has kind of left him wondering where things stand with him and the property, because the deed holder is now, going to be on trial at some point. And he told our reporter that he has plans to renovate the building, which is a former church. And then in county properties, the property is assessed as poor, which is kind of rare for a building to have. There's about 9 different ratings assessors give properties, and poor is the lowest of them. The alleged shooter bought the property in 2020, and then it kind of moved back and forth between him and several different people over the next few years. And we talked to a staffer in the Woodbury County Sheriff's Office on Tuesday, and they said that deputies responded to calls involving that property probably more than 100 times between 2016 and 2022. Now, again, the alleged shooter didn't own the property until 2020, and we've been trying to work to confirm how many of those calls might have come while the alleged shooter specifically owned the property. And then another neighbor that our intern Eric talked to said that she observed, quote, a lot of riffraff hanging around the property during the time that the alleged shooter owned it. So,
it's real interesting stuff. Check out that story as well if you haven't already. Maya, let me bring you in. Veteran on Iowa politics listeners know that Maya has some Minnesota blood in her, and on top of that, Maya was actually back in Minnesota this last weekend when this all happened, nowhere near the shooting. I believe, Maya, correct me if I'm wrong there. Tell us just it's kind of interesting that you were there. What was the reaction there like? And are these names of Representative Hoffman and Representative Hortman and Senator Hoffman? Are these folks you had been familiar with, Maya?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was in the Twin Cities over the weekend, visiting friends and family, and I was staying in Minneapolis. So this happened in the northwestern quadrant of the Twin Cities, kind of in the suburbs of Brooklyn Park. So it was about, a couple miles north of where I was staying at the time. But yeah, I think that I guess anywhere that this would happen, people were validly in shock. Everyone, when we were still getting information that morning before Governor Tim Walz came on and did a press conference announcing that Speaker Hortman had been killed along with her husband, people were still trying to figure out what was going on. All we knew is that there were shootings and that the lawmakers were shot and their spouses as well. So it also made this day a little bit more chaotic because this was the day where there were supposed to be a ton of scheduled protests called No Kings Day, which was in response to people that don't agree with President Trump and his administration. And it was planned to coincide with a parade and a celebration he held in D.C. during his 79th birthday and also the 250th anniversary of the United States Army and military. So it was an interesting day there. They didn't catch him for a while, and so there was an active manhunt going on. It ended up being the longest manhunt or the largest manhunt in Minnesota's history. There was a shelter-in-place warning for folks in Brooklyn Park, in that area where the lawmakers' houses were located. But when I was in downtown Minneapolis later that day, there were screens that announced bus schedules and other things, and they had these big warnings on them saying shelter-in-place. People weren't following that. People were going along about their day. Mostly, of course, a lot of people, I can't say what a lot of people were doing. And Minnesota police advised people not to attend these protests throughout the day just for fear of further violence. Vance Belter did have flyers for No King's Day protests in the vehicle that Tom mentioned that was parked outside of Representative Hortman's house. And so they're just very unsure. People still showed up to those protests, but that was just a warning put up by the police. To your question of, did I know these names? So Representative Melissa Hortman, she's been in the Minnesota State Legislature for 11 terms. She was elected in 2004, representing kind of a swingy district in northwestern Twin Cities. And she was elected Speaker of the House in 2019. So as a student journalist covering the legislature in different respects, I definitely knew the name and reported on things that she did as leader. And so, yeah, it was just hit pretty close to home. But Tom mentioned a little bit about what folks had to say about Speaker Hortman. She was speaker, obviously, for six sessions. And although Minnesota is broadly considered a pretty blue state with a blue governor, a big Democratic governor, a big Democratic congressional delegation, things are a little bit more divided at the state legislative level. Like when I was covering the state legislature as a student in 2023, I think it was 2022, Republicans had control of the Senate, Democrats had control of the House, and so it was split. And so she was obviously leading in that. And then in 2023 was when Democrats secured a trifecta and they were able to pass a lot of more Democratic legislation. And then this session, the House was 67-67 split. And so she also guided lawmakers through that and had to, like Tom mentioned, be able to work with people from across the political spectrum in order to get a state budget passed. So she was known as, she had a lot of experience in leadership and being able to reach across the aisle and just had that leadership experience. So,
yeah, that's great stuff. Thanks, Maya. That's cool to have you and have that kind of background and experience to illustrate kind of person that we lost there. That's fascinating stuff, and obviously horrible situation. All right, a lot of important coverage on this, like I talked about, and those candidate announcements. Make sure you check out all the stories that we talked about. That's going to do it for this episode of On Iowa Politics. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or at YouTube, where you can also smash that like button. And you can find the podcast each week as well on your preferred Gazette or Lee newspaper website. Now that you've listened to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you're also subscribed to the On Iowa Politics newsletter, where every morning in your inbox, you'll receive all the latest politics and government coverage from our team. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. And again, as I mentioned, all these stories you can find on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mason City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For Tom Barton, Maya Marchel, Hoff, Sarah Watson, Jared McNett, Althea Cole, and our producer Bailey Chehan, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone, and be good.